We name fancy cars and sports teams after them, but precious few people have ever seen a Jaguar in the wild. They don't live in the United States anymore and can only be found in the sweltering jungles of Central and South America. But just try to find one. They hunt by night and sleep by day, comfortably concealed in thick, dark brush. It's because of their elusive nature, their power, and their beauty that jaguars have long been worshipped by tribes as demigods, whose real home is a spiritual world which man cannot even fathom. But whichever world they frequent, they only emerge briefly during the dry season when they go down to rivers to drink. So when it got dry in September, and Alan Rabinowitz, the world's foremost authority on jaguars, invited us to go with him to some far-flung wetlands in Brazil, near the Bolivian border, we picked up the phone and booked our flights. We headed towards an unspoiled, remote area called the Pantanal, where the temperature rarely dipped below 115 degrees. We had to cross more than 125 rustic wooden bridges over dried-up ponds and lakes, home to piranhas and caimans, cousins to the crocodile. It was good to be in a car. We started our search for jaguars on the Cuyaba River with Alan Rabinowitz, the CEO of Panthera, a new conservation group. He told us the jaguars are very fast and have been known to kill people. It was good to be in a boat. Rabinowitz has been studying the cat's migration routes and habitats in the jungle for 30 years, but he has gone months without seeing a single one. His advice to us? Get lucky.
It takes hours and hours of doing this because even when they're out there, it's almost needle in a haystack. Even though this is the densest, highest concentration of jaguars matching any place on Earth, there's still a limited number of jaguars here.
But luck was a lady that day. It wasn't long before we caught our first glimpse, and it was just a glimpse, of a young jaguar sitting on the riverbank behind that fallen tree. If you can't see him clearly, well, neither could we. But Rabinowitz?
Its head is right there. Amazing. See it? You got it. It's beautiful. See it? Isn't that something? This gives you the real gut feel of the secretive nature of this animal. There's no sign of defeat in its face. Wow.
At dawn the next day, we went looking for jaguars again. One of our spotters tried to tempt the cats out of the jungle, but his simulated mating call just didn't do it. But it might have appealed to anacondas. This fellow was medium-sized, according to the spotters, 9 feet long. Then we went up a small river that looked like an aquatic Garden of Eden. No jaguars here either, but an extraordinary assembly of birds and others. We saw a family of very rare giant river otters basking in the sun after a morning of fishing and swimming. We saw the world's largest rodents, unflappable 100-pound capybaras, a favorite dish of jaguars. Jaguars like caiman as well. This caiman was having lunch. This one had been somebody else's lunch, probably a jaguar's.
Small. It's a young jaguar.
Photographer Steve Winter has been a jaguar groupie for years and was helping us look for the cats. He has shot what could be the finest jaguar portraits ever taken. They weren't easy to come by.
I spent the first 3 months in the jungle and got a big fat 0.
Really?
No cats.
3 months.
Right.
How'd you feel about that?
I felt like my career was over.
We were beginning to feel the same way. So we headed out again at night. Our spotters told us that they could see the reflection of their lights in the eyes of a jaguar 100 yards away. We were skeptical. We were wrong.
That's like 80 to 85 kilos. And that's a relatively small jaguar in this area. at her. God, she's beautiful. Oh, man, and when she looks right at you.
It's one of the most beautiful things I've ever seen.
Yeah, this was great sighting.
But the best was yet to come. A few minutes later, we happened to be there as a jaguar swam from one side of the river to the other. It was a once-in-a-lifetime shot in the dark.
This is a rare sight. I've never caught them in the water. I've never gotten it in the water before. I was a young one.
Dr. Alan Rabinowitz, zoologist, scholar, scientist, was as excited as a kid at the zoo. Perhaps more excited.
That was spectacular. I've never seen that before. What luck, what unbelievable luck, just as it's swimming across. There was no fear there. There was just pure curiosity. Like, what are you guys bothering me about?
Maybe we had bothered her because she disappeared. But then it seems she got curious again.
Look at that. It's just sitting up there on the mountain. That's phenomenal.
She looked a little sleepy or confused, but there she was, the diva, perfectly lit, taking her curtain call. It was hard to imagine that this lovely starlet was really a ferocious predator who sinks her fangs into the skull of her prey, killing it instantly. We were beginning to understand why jaguars were viewed as otherworldly beings by the tribes that used to live here. Because he's a creature of the night, his real home is said to be the underworld, which he dominates just as he dominates the jungle. Killing a jaguar is believed by some tribes as being equivalent to killing an ancestor, and is said to condemn the killer to eternal damnation. That myth has helped the jaguar survive. And in the strangest way, jaguars helped Alan Rabinowitz survive. It all began with a debilitating condition he suffered through, even before he knew what a jaguar was.
When I was a young child, I couldn't speak. I had a severe, severe stutter.
You literally couldn't talk.
I could talk, but I had severe blocks. My whole body would spasm. My mouth would close shut. And back then, unlike now, they thought it was completely psychological. Now we know it's more genetic. So they would put me in special classes. They would put me in what all the kids called the retarded classes. And I just stopped trying. I stopped even trying to speak to the human world. What I could do, stutterers can sing without stuttering, and I couldn't sing very well. And stutterers can speak to animals. And every day I'd come home from school and I'd go into my closet because I love being in the dark, and I'd speak to my green turtles or chameleons or lizards or garter snakes. If I was having a particularly bad week at school, which often happened, my father would take me to the Bronx Zoo.
And that's where his fascination, his obsession began, in the Bronx Zoo.
One pitiful lone jaguar sat in the great cat house. It was big, it was powerful, and it was all alone. And I was so incredibly attracted to that one lone jaguar. I would make my father stay back, and I would lean over towards the bars, and I would start talking.
You talked to the jaguar.
I did talk to the jaguar.
Remember what you said?
I would say how people are stupid, how they don't understand me clearly the same way they don't understand you, how they're locking you up in this cage the way I'm locked up in my own head. Those are the things I would talk about to the jaguar. I made a promise over and over again that if I ever got my voice back, that somehow I would help that animal, help that jaguar, help these animals like him.
Alan Rabinowitz has kept his promise. Devotion to jaguars became his religion. Before he got married, he lived alone in the jungle just to be close to jaguars, doing then what he does now, learning more about them every day. Setting up traps like this one, so that he can attach radio collars to their necks. One night, Alan and his team snared this young lady and put her to sleep for a while. This is the same cat we saw swimming this afternoon, isn't it?
It's likely. It looks as if it probably is.
The team monitored the jaguar's vital signs, took a blood sample, and put a GPS unit around her neck.
It's through the data of a few animals like this that we're able to be saving this whole species.
And here's a jaguar we saw from the sky. The data Rabinowitz has collected showed him that jaguars instinctively travel great distances, sometimes hundreds of miles. Trouble is, they can't anymore. Cattle ranches now interrupt their old roaming routes, and ranchers kill jaguars because jaguars eat their cattle. That's where billionaire Tom Kaplan, the co-founder of Panthera, the outfit trying to save jaguars, comes in. He's buying up ranches and telling the ranchers, his employees now, to lay off the jaguars. To make sure they understand that there's been a change of ownership, he's introduced a new branding iron. The paw print of a jaguar. He's also winning them over the old-fashioned way, improving their lives, building schools and clinics.
There is no better way to stop poaching than to make the local community say, hey, wait a minute, our children have medicine and education because of the jaguar. When you show that, you've won their hearts and you've won their minds, and then you've won the war.
Alan Rabinowitz wants the jaguars to be able to roam freely again, so he's working with governments as well as ranchers to protect what he calls jaguar corridors. They connect the different isolated areas where the cats are still thriving. He gets to these areas sometimes, and sometimes he gets too close. Now, how far away are you from him?
I would say about 20 feet.
20 feet?
Yeah.
And he is standing, sitting, lying?
He was standing. Then probably within a few seconds, I realized this is dangerous. And I fell. Of course, you know, what more could happen? So I fell backwards, thinking, okay, if you want to kill me, then now's the time. I'm on my back. And the jaguar just stood up and started walking off into the jungle, not very far away. But this is what I'll never forget. It turned back to me. It gave a low growl. It wasn't an aggressive growl. It just gave kind of a low growling sound, and it looked at me. And I looked at it, and I could look at its eyes now with no fear. And I said to it, I said out loud, we're okay now. We're gonna be okay.
Alan Rabinowitz can only hope he'll be okay. He conquered his stutter, but now he's fighting leukemia and doesn't know how much longer he'll be able to stay in the jungle. But before we left, he told us he was happy that after his 30 years of devotion, we'd be introducing so many of his friends on 60 Minutes. Can you imagine an orphanage that's a happy place? We couldn't, but then we found one. The kids don't arrive here smiling. Like orphans all over the world, they've been abandoned, they're hungry, sad, and desperate. But after a few years, they're healthy, well-fed, and, well, happy. The orphanage is in Kenya, outside Nairobi, and we might as well tell you now, it's an orphanage for elephants. They've been orphaned because their parents, their mothers mainly, have died, or more likely been killed in the bush. Poachers kill large elephants for their ivory. A young elephant can only survive a day or two without milk, so the orphanage's first job is to find the orphans, fly them to the orphanage, and before anything else, feed them. The principal of the orphanage, the principal, headmistress, head nurse, and CEO, is Dame Daphne Sheldrick. She founded the place, has been working with elephants for 50 years.
This is little Seguta. This is the one that was in a coma when she arrived. Was on a drip for 24 hours. We never thought she'd be alive in the morning. So she's our little miracle, this one.
But Daphne's problem is that she's caring for too many miracles. Poachers are killing more and more elephants for their tusks, creating more and more orphans. There's a record number of orphans here right now because, Daphne says, the sale of ivory has been legalized for the first time in 10 years. A few African countries have been given the right to sell their ivory stockpiles, more than 100 tons of tusks, to China and Japan. And conservationists point out this is yet another blow to Africa's elephants. Do you see any correlation between the decision to auction off the ivory and the number of orphans?
We do. Every time ivory is auctioned legally, there's a rise in poaching. And we also see the correlation in the price that's paid to the poacher for illegal ivory.
Is the price going up?
It's gone from 300 shillings a kilo to 5,000.
That's about $1,000 a tusk. And in Kenya, the number of elephants killed by poachers has increased by 45% this year alone. A rather amazing rise, isn't it?
It is. It's a scary, frightening rise.
Poachers were behind the death of this elephant. Her trunk was caught in one of their snares, and she had no way of feeding herself or her 6-week-old baby boy. He just couldn't accept the fact that his mother was dead, so he continued trying to suckle. Eventually, the keepers got him to drink their milk. They called him Shimba, and he was in such bad shape that nobody thought he would survive. But then he was brought to the orphanage, and things began going his way. He's 27 months old now, and is in very good shape. Very muscular, very strong, and he's beginning to grow tusks. He never stops eating. In fact, that's the first love of every orphan here, eating. The institution has a dining area, and that's not all. As we found out when we first dropped by here 3 years ago, it has everything you'd want in an orphanage. Dormitories, each orphan has a private room, a communal bath, and a playground. The regimen at the orphanage is anything but Dickensian. Unlike Oliver Twist, when one of these orphans asks for more, that's what he gets, more. Ultimately, Daphne finds elephants more sympathetic than people. What is the most extraordinary thing you have learned about elephants?
Their tremendous capacity for caring is, I think, perhaps the most amazing thing about them, even at a very, very young age. Their sort of forgiveness, unselfishness. So, you know, I often say, as I think I've said before, they have all the best attributes of us humans and not very many of the bad.
Just about the best people you've ever met are the gentlemen who work here. Keepers, they're called, and they have extraordinary jobs. There is one keeper per elephant. He'll spend 24 hours a day with his charge, 7 days a week. A keeper feeds his elephant every 3 hours, day and night, just like Mom would. He keeps his elephant warm, not like Mom would, but with a blanket. And when it's sleep time, he beds down right next to his elephant. If he leaves, if ever so briefly, the baby wakes up and broadcasts his displeasure. The keepers are rotated now and then, so that no elephant gets too terribly attached to any one of them. At dawn, the elephants are taken from their dorms out to the bush. They hang out for a while, play some games.
Come on, here. Roleni, come on.
Soccer is a favorite.
Come on.
And guess who decides when it's halftime? The days are pretty much the same here, but on Fridays, the orphanage becomes a spa. You want to rubber down? Go on, rubber down. The keepers give the elephants a coconut oil massage.
We can't do exactly what the mother can do, but we do something close to that.
You're a surrogate mother.
Yes.
Edwin Lucici is the head of the keepers. He is the chief elephant man.
This one here is Lwaleni. Lwaleni is the oldest female we have, 16 months as well. The tiny one here is Makena.
Right.
Always want to be close with Lwaleni.
Yes, well, they always want to be close to each other and to you, don't they? I'm afraid this interview with Edmund is getting rudely interrupted.
Yes.
But there's really not that much to do. They may be little, they may be orphans, but trust me, they're not as little as they look. In fact, I feel like I'm in an elephant sandwich.
Yes, you are.
Perhaps the problem was we had not been properly introduced. There is a protocol to meeting an elephant. He will offer up his trunk, and he expects you to blow in it. That way, he will remember your scent forever. You will never be strangers again.
The little baby's been captured.
The orphanage gets distress calls from all over Kenya, from all over East Africa, that a baby elephant is on his own, often because his mother has been killed by a poacher. It is then a matter of great urgency. An orphaned elephant can only survive a few days without his mother. The baby elephant is loaded onto a plane and flown back to Daphne Sheldrick's orphanage outside Nairobi, where he'll stay until he's strong enough to go back into the bush. Dame Daphne has been running the orphanage for almost 30 years. She was born and raised in Kenya and married David Sheldrick, Africa's leading crusader against poaching. When he died in 1977, she founded the David Sheldrick Wildlife Trust. Daphne saw her mission as saving as many elephants as possible, but she has never permitted herself too much hope. That's because she loses half the elephants that arrive here, some from pneumonia, some from trauma. This elephant probably witnessed its mother's death and remembers everything. That's the double-edged sword of having the memory of an elephant. They never forget.
He's still grieving for his elephant family. He's in shock. He's distressed.
Do you believe a baby elephant can die of grief?
Oh, yes, I know it can. They're terribly, terribly fragile. You've got to try and turn the psyche round, duplicating what that elephant would have had in an elephant family, touching them, talking to him gently.
In other words, love.
Tender, loving care, TLC, and a lot of it.
Daphne and the keepers may run this place officially, but it's the elephants who are really in charge. For example, when a new keeper is hired, he's on probation for 3 months. Then, if the elephants like him, he's got a job. If not, he's out. What do you try to teach them?
Well, we have to teach them not to be naughty, not to push around with the others, to obey one another, just like you have to do to your children, your own children, to respect the others.
And the keepers teach the elephants how to be elephants. There are wild elephant things these kids don't know how to do. Mother wasn't around to teach them. Things like covering themselves in dust to prevent sunburn. The keepers do it with shovels until the elephants pick it up themselves. The orphanage has an infirmary, and the doctor has a call to make. One of the elephants is not doing well at all. He's been on antibiotics for 2 days now, but he can barely breathe.
All this froth that's coming out of his trunk has got to be pulmonary edema.
His room looks like an intensive care unit. The doctor, Daphne, and the keepers don't leave him for a minute. They do everything they can, but it's not enough. By dawn, he is dead. How do you manage going through this all the time?
Well, you don't have much option, do you? There's another one to look after, and then another one coming, and, you just have to turn the page.
And you get attached
But I'm not very good at it.
And you're not going to get any better, are you?
No. Not after 50 years.
But then you go and you hang out with the orphans who are doing so well, and it brings joy to your life.
Absolutely.
It's actually a pretty lush life for these elephants here at the orphanage, but it's not the life of a wild elephant. It's not their destiny. So like any good school, this place prepares its students to leave, to get ready for life in the real world, to go back to the wild from whence they came. This young lady left Daphne's orphanage to go live in the wild. Her name is Mpenzi, and a couple of years ago, she became pregnant and decided to go off on her own to give birth, without the protection of her extended family. That was a mistake. Before the sun could set, Mpenzi and her baby were surrounded by a pride of 16 lions. Keeper Joseph Sawney was called to the scene and captured the events on his still camera.
Some pens was standing there trying to scare off lions with a trunk.
Yeah.
But when they came, she tried to push them on this side, others come at the back.
And Mpenzi didn't have a chance.
Yeah.
How did you and the other keepers react?
It was so sad. In fact, everybody was crying.
And there was nothing they could do to save the baby. It was a brutal lesson for Mpenzi. Nature has its own laws. They're a long way from the sheltered world of the orphanage. But this story has a happy ending. Just days before we arrived, Mpenzi gave birth to another little girl. The keepers have all come out to cheer her on. They named her Asante, which in Swahili means thank you. Mpenzi has learned her lesson. This time she makes sure her bundle of joy is surrounded by other members of the family. They help her up when she falls down and rescue her when she tumbles into a mud hole. So for the moment, Asante will be safe, at least until she grows tusks.
If you could go just one place, anywhere on the planet, to see the most spectacular wildlife, you'd want to head east to catch a sight that comes round every year, but only for a short time. It's called the Great Migration, millions of animals on an endless march of life and death and rebirth. We'll save most of the superlatives for the pictures because you might agree this is one of the greatest shows on Earth. We thought you should see it now because there's no guarantee it'll be around forever.
There was a time when epic migrations were common. Millions of buffalo in North America, for example. But today, to see what that must have been like, you have to travel to East Africa. Here in late summer, more than 1 million wildebeest cross the volcanic plain of the Masai Mara in Kenya, pushing through one of the most awe-inspiring wildlife habitats on Earth. Nearly everything Africa has to offer, all in one place. The dry season is moving the herds, concentrating them where there's still grass and water. It's a march of 350 miles up from the Serengeti National Park in Tanzania to the Masai Mara National Reserve in Kenya and back again.
Wildebeest calves, when they're born,
American scientist Robin Reed was hooked the very first time she saw it as a student. She's on the faculty at Colorado State University and has spent decades studying the animals and the Maasai people who share the land with the Mara migration.
we don't have migrations anymore this large. So this is the only one that stands by itself that is this large. Now, if you're talking about butterflies or you're talking about birds, you're talking about, smaller animals, absolutely, you easily get up into these kinds of numbers. But as far as big animals, that are walking long distance, this is the one.
This is the last one on Earth.
Yes, the last one on Earth that is this large.
Wildebeest is Dutch for wild beast, which may refer more to its appearance than any ferocity. It's a relative of the antelope, but it's unlike anything you've ever seen. They call lions regal and elephants majestic. I wonder what you'd call a wildebeest.
I think they look insane. Their horns are kind of, this way and that, and then they have these big shoulders, and why in the heck is that? And they're a funny color, they're not pretty, and they've got a long tail. They're put together in pieces.
Well, somebody once said it looks like an animal that's made out of spare parts.
And that's very apt.
Along with the wildebeest, there are hundreds of thousands of zebra, nearly 500,000 gazelles, and all of them crossing the territory of predators, including lion, hyena, this cheetah that we found with her 3 newborn cubs, and the biggest predator of them all, crocodiles, that patrol the Mara River, which cuts right through the migration route. This is easily the most dramatic point in the entire year-long migration. There comes a time that the wildebeest and their calves have to cross the Mara River. You can't believe how big these crocodiles are. One of them is at least 15 feet long. But the wildebeest have to come over in order to feed, and the crocodiles know that. A wildebeest may go through 10 migrations in its lifetime. And to see them hesitate at the bank, it's as though many of them knew what was coming. First, 2 wildebeest scramble across. The next group takes the plunge right into the waiting crocs. The big croc strikes and has the wildebeest's horns between its jaws. A second crocodile attacks, then a third, a fourth, and a fifth. Now it's a struggle to find enough water to pull the wildebeest down to drown. In the few days that it takes the herds to cross the river, the crocs will bring down enough food to last for months. Once the wildebeest see where the crocs are, the herd runs upstream and surges across by the hundreds. No one can say how long this migration has thrived, but on the Mara River we began to see evidence that its future is not a sure thing. Usually, the wildebeest swim across, but now the river is very low. Could what has happened to other migrations in the world happen here? Is it possible?
Of course, absolutely. The thing I'm most worried about for the future is the Mara River and the amount of water in it. It's just the, kind of the main artery of the ecosystem, and it's very important.
This is that artery that Robin Reed is talking about, and the best way to see it is from the air. The Mara River rises in a place called the Mau Forest, and it meanders about 250 miles or so down to Lake Victoria. The Maasai tell us that there is less water in the river now than at any time they can remember. If the Mara River went away, what impact would it have on all this?
We're not absolutely sure, but in the dry season, it's the only thing that flows. And so if that water went away, then the wildebeest population would collapse.
Collapse?
Yes.
What do you mean by collapse?
I don't actually know if there would be very many left, actually. Not just the wildebeest, it would be many of the other species that require water.
You would lose hundreds of thousands of these animals?
Absolutely, absolutely. In fact, the estimates are, and this is a guess, is that if the river were to dry up completely, okay, in the very first week after it dried up, we'd lose about 400,000 animals that would die.
In a week?
In a week, yes. And, maybe that's an overestimate, but even if it's in a month, that's a lot.
We wanted to find out why the Mara River seems to be drying up, so we headed north to its source, the Mau Forest. The first thing you notice are wheat fields where the trees used to be, and beyond the expanding farms, we headed towards smoke on the horizon. The trip brought us here. We're about 5 miles from the Mara River. This isn't a wheat field yet, but it soon will be. What happens before the forest becomes a wheat field is that charcoalers move through the area and cut down the trees to make one of the principal fuels for cooking. The Mau Forest is falling to a growing population that's trying to make a living off the land. For centuries, the Mau has been a sponge, holding and releasing waters into the river. To scientists, the equation is simple. If there's no Mau Forest, there's no Mara River, and that means no migration. Now, saving the Mau Forest has become a crisis in Kenya, pitting the government against its own people. The government has forcibly evicted as many as 50,000 settlers from the Mau. We saw it in the village of Nkoroni, which was settled in the forest more than 30 years ago. The Kenyan government, back in the 1990s, even gave some of the villagers title to the land. It says nature of title, absolute. You take it to mean absolute. Well, not exactly. A new government has turned on them. Now it says to save the forest, villages like this have to go. In 2005, the government sent security forces to burn homes, schools, and churches. But still, the people refuse to leave.
We will stay. We will not go anywhere. If they want to kill us, they kill us.
You die right here. The villagers in the forest don't see why their families should be uprooted for a wildlife refuge they've never seen. But we found a different story downriver in the Mara itself, where the growing population of Maasai has been willing to compromise.
The population is a wild problem. It's growing, and it's growing everywhere. And
Dixon Kaelo works for a nonprofit foundation that's paying the Maasai to turn over management of their land to a wildlife conservancy.
Many of the families before the conservancy started were, very poor, and quite a number of them are able now to survive and diversify away from just keeping cattle.
The Maasai have been expanding their farms and grazing cattle near the migration routes. Now, the Conservancy manages their land for wildlife. Tourists pay to see the wildlife, and the Maasai get a cut of the profits. Families we talk to say they bring in an extra $200 a month, enough to send the kids to school.
So this is all part of the Conservancy?
Kaelo has brought nearly 300 square miles under management, and that's growing.
I think the children and the children of our children would like to be able to experience the migration. It doesn't matter whether they're living in China or in the Far East or in America. They would like to know that the migration is still continuing.
As the wildebeest moved out of the Masai Mara, we could see the beginnings of next year's spectacle. The elephants were raising their calves, and that cheetah was feeding her cubs on a water buck she'd killed. Cheetah cubs chirp like birds, and if they survive, they'll still be with their mother when the wildebeest come round again. This perpetual cycle is still a robust force of nature, but with the Mara River running low and man crowding the route, no one can be certain how many turns are left for this, the last spectacle of its kind.
More Americans go to zoos every year than to professional baseball, football, hockey, and basketball games combined. We get to encounter the dangers of the wild from the safety of suburbia. But increasingly, zoos see their mission as not just displaying animals, but also saving endangered species. And that raises an interesting question. Can endangered animals born and bred in captivity be released into the wild? A conservation group called the Aspinall Foundation is trying to find out. It's run by Damien Aspinall, a multimillionaire who owns a chain of casinos in England. But his biggest gamble involves his animals. They say that the English can be eccentric, but Damien Aspinall takes the cake. This 54-year-old likes to play tug of war with tigers and pet black rhinos. But gorillas are his best buddies, and wrestling with them is his favorite pastime.
They're part of my family and I'm part of their family. They see me as an intricate part of their lives. And when I look after these animals, they're my equal.
Now the tricky thing is getting out. I'm not allowed to leave.
Damien gets to do this because he oversees this 500-acre wildlife park that looks like the Serengeti, but is in Kent, England, surrounding Damien's country estates. The zoo was started by his wealthy and no less eccentric father, who liked to take a dip in the pool with the tigers and let the gorillas roam about the grounds.
When you were a little boy, were the gorillas your playmates?
Yeah, without question. The problem being, of course, you never had any human friends because no parents would ever let you have a play date.
When Damien took over the zoo, he set out to save the species. Over 130 critically endangered western lowland gorillas have been bred here, more than at any other zoo on Earth. Also, 30 near-extinct black rhinos, 180 tigers, and 140 rare clouded leopards. But not to keep them. It wasn't long before Damien decided that zoos are immoral. They're jails that lock up the innocent for life. So his goal now is to set all the animals that were born here free.
If I could extinguish all zoos over the next 30 years, including my own, I would. I wouldn't hesitate.
And you don't think, as many do, that the zoo animal is an ambassador and that they educate the public, who then in turn becomes more interested in conservation?
Please show me the statistical evidence that zoos educate, and that education that they claim they're doing has helped animals in the wild. There is no evidence, because it's a lie.
But if you go to a zoo, you should see the faces of children when they actually see an animal.
But that's so wrong. The face should be one of disgust. That's what's so wrong. We've culturalized them that, oh, those animals are here for our pleasure. They're not. We don't have the right as a species to take animals to pleasure our children. That disgusts me. These poor animals.
So this zookeeper, who hates zoos, announced that he was going to send an entire family of zoo gorillas to Africa. A silverback named Jala, his 5 wives, and 4 infants. A project no other zoo would even consider.
Why isn't anybody else doing it?
Because they don't believe in it. You've got to understand, we're considered mavericks. You know, we're
actually considered a little nutty.
Yeah, but that's such a good thing. It's only the nutty people who ever get anything done in this world.
But these giants are actually very fragile. They get stressed and even depressed by change, finding it hard to adapt to new environments, especially the adults.
You know, people think, well, we're going to send them home to Africa. This is home. They were born here. Why would they want to go back if they're living a cushy...
Why wouldn't they want to go back?
Well, because it's cushy here.
But so you decide that?
But you're deciding to send them back.
Because that's where they belong. I'm not really deciding anything. They, for 50,000 years, have evolved in this forest. That's surely where they belong, not after 12 years living in a zoo.
But isn't it dangerous for the animals to release them into the wild if they've been raised in a place like this, where they're pampered and they're fed? How can they survive in the wild?
Man always underestimates the intelligence of wild animals. You have to help them on their way, but if you leave them be, they'll pick it up immediately.
To help them on their way, Damien created Gorilla School in his mansion's backyard, where he himself taught these English-born infants survival basics, like how to climb a tree and avoid poison berries.
Come on, there we are.
Still, sending a family of 10 gorillas to Africa was a massive undertaking. They had to be sedated and couriered, you couldn't make this up, by DHL.
Was that hard for you? I mean, you're basically sending your family away.
Honestly, no. I'm so proud that they're going where they belong. If I didn't do it, I would not live easy within myself.
The gorillas were flown to Gabon and taken by raft to this dense forest, about 1 million acres that he bought and turned into a national park to protect animals like the western lowland gorillas, whose numbers keep dwindling due to habitat destruction and poaching.
I'm wondering why the poachers even want gorillas. They don't have horns, they don't have ivory.
Bushmeat, they'll eat the gorillas.
They're poaching them.
They'll cut the hands off and sell them as ashtrays. The babies are taken for pet trade.
To keep them safe, the gorillas were taken at first to an island to acclimate. Damien's staff continued to feed them and give them medicines, like malaria pills.
Okay.
This wasn't his first time sending gorillas here. He had already sent 12 from his zoo, but they were all babies who hadn't adapted yet to the zoo. He's taken many trips to see how they're doing. He says most of them have survived and multiplied. But on one visit that he videotaped, he was concerned about one of them, Queeby, who hadn't been seen in a long time.
And I went up the river and called for him. He obviously heard my call, and he came down to the edge of the river, and I jumped out of the boat and I went to see him, and he greeted me with a fantastic gurgle, love gurgle. We sat there together, and he was so sweet, and he introduced me to all his wives. Oh, thank you. Then when I wanted to leave, he wouldn't let me leave. He clung on to me very tightly. He wanted me to stay, but You know, I know the best thing for him was for me not to stay, and he's wild, and let him be wild. I'll come and see you tomorrow, okay? All right, I'll come and see you tomorrow.
Looks idyllic, but conservationists we spoke to were critical of Damien, some calling his work a vanity project.
Maybe it makes him feel good. He has a relationship with these animals, and he wants to do well for them, and he thinks that taking them back to Africa will be doing that. But it's not conservation.
Tara Stowinski is president of the Dian Fossey Gorilla Fund, run out of Zoo Atlanta, home to the largest collection of gorillas in North America. She says returning a handful of zoo animals can't begin to counter the vast numbers that are lost every year. So Damien's money would be better spent saving gorillas already in the wild.
We need all hands on deck right now to be conserving wild populations. We need funds to be going into saving these wild places so that the animals that are living there currently can continue to survive.
You know, there's just something kind of, I think, in us, intuitively in us, that we want to see these animals roaming free.
I think that humans have a very romantic notion of what the wild is like. And the wild is not a place where it is safe and animals get to roam free and make choices. They have to find food, they have to avoid predators, they have to find mates. And then you add on top of that all of the challenges that our humans are imposing, whether it be hunting, habitat loss, disease. I think the challenges that these wild populations face are huge.
1 year after the silverback from Kent, Jala, and his family were sent to Gabon, we went with Damien to see how they were coping.
Here we are.
We snaked down the Impasa River, but there was no sign of Jala through the dense vegetation. Then a glimpse of eyes and limbs through the trees. As our boat approached, the females and infants came slowly into the clearing.
They're so calm. It's such a beautiful thing to see. I mean, how happy do they look?
But when Jala came forward, he didn't look all that happy.
He knows I'm here now. He's protecting his females. He's just looking at me.
But Damien was ecstatic as they settled on the grass in front of us.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
A full house.
Did you give the baby a name?
Yeah, that's Aku.
Aku.
Damien began tossing them coconuts, sugarcane, and bananas.
That's Tamki. She's calling for some. Hey.
She keeps wanting more.
You're so silly. She's smart, though, because she gets more than anyone else.
Do you think that you have brought them home?
Without any question, yeah.
But they weren't totally free yet. Damien's idea was to complete this bridge only when he felt they could fend for themselves.
And just over the other side of that bridge is the true wilderness.
They don't swim.
No. So here they're protected because they're on an island, but once they cross the bridge, they'll come across elephants and leopards and other gorillas. Jala's going to be defending his females. He might lose some of his females. It could become very stressful.
You mean other males
Other
who
males,
are there,
yeah.
wild?
Yes, wild.
Will
want his
challenge him
females.
for his
Yeah.
females.
But Damien thinks this family is ready, and so he and his crew put the final planks on the bridge. Then he tries to lure the gorillas over with, but of course, food.
Come on! Come on!
Wouldn't you know it, the females venture out first, and once again, Jala follows their lead.
Jala's going in.
Brilliant.
Oh my goodness, and look at the babies, the second one. Oh my gosh.
That's wonderful, isn't it?
That's 1-year-old Aku. Within an hour, all 10 had crossed over.
This is the ultimate goal.
The ultimate.
This is the Holy Grail.
Although they will get over on this side and inevitably face dangers
Yeah,
that
they
they're
will.
not really prepared for.
The problem will be is when the other males turn up here. They have been quite near in the last few days. So I suspect they are quite near. And I suspect within a few hours they'll be coming to investigate.
Oh boy.
Oh boy, yeah.
If only we could end on an optimistic note, but we can't. A month after the gorillas crossed the bridge, Damien's team found all 5 adult females dead, including Tamki, as well as baby Aku. An outcome so many of Damien's critics predicted. So what does this mean for his experiment? We remembered what he said back in Kent.
It may be a disaster. And if it's a disaster and they all die, all those people will jump up and down and say he was an idiot. Fine, I'm willing to take that. I don't care. I don't seek popularity. I'm the ambassador for these animals. I'm here to protect those animals and give them their chance to go back into the wild. Because what I don't believe in is they should spend the rest of their lives in captivity.
Damien's best guess is that a wild male silverback attacked the family, killing some on the spot, others dying from injury, infections, or stress. He called it a hell of a setback, but is determined to send more gorillas into the wild.